It had been a typical school day when alarms suddenly rang out across all educational institutions. A strange, dark fog filled the surroundings, and people stared into it with confusion and disbelief. Many initially assumed that someone was filming a movie, especially since the grotesque, doll-like figure in the mist seemed out of place. However, what stood before them was no prop. It was a goblin, standing in the middle of a bus, wielding a massive axe. Its blood-red eyes glowed menacingly, and its fangs jutted out from its mouth. That day, many witnessed what could only be described as hell, and most would not survive it. Some people were overwhelmed by panic and paralyzing fear. Others, their hands trembling, tried to contact the police. Chaos quickly unfolded on the bus as passengers fell one after another. The horrific scene caused widespread terror, and people began to scream and run. Groups of 5 goblins would swarm a single person, ruthlessly attacking and not stopping until there was nothing left. In everyone's eyes, there was nothing but dread, helplessness, and the claustrophobic realization that escape was impossible. The protagonist, Jack, found himself unable to calm down. He was certain that no one on the bus would survive for more than a minute. He knew the goblins would kill everyone, children and adults alike, and that this attack could wipe out 80% of the souls present. Back in 2028, on another seemingly ordinary day in Seoul, people had been busy with school and work. Students chatted about the recent exams, many complaining that the tests were too difficult and that they had likely failed. At one table sat Jack, a 30-year-old man who had been preparing for the civil service exam for 7 years. 10 years earlier, a mysterious gate had opened in Seoul, unleashing chaos and birthing a new reality, one in which some survivors awakened as players, people endowed with powerful talents. Jack had once dreamed of becoming a player too, but when he discovered that he had no talents, he gave up that ambition and focused on passing the civil service exam. He often overheard others talking about powerful players. Nearby, some young men were discussing a viral video showing a man fighting so fiercely he seemed unstoppable. One of them muttered that he would fight just as well if he had talent. But in the end, they both knew they were ordinary people and could only focus on their exams. As Jack silently ate his meal, he listened to their conversation. They were talking about a man who had reportedly awakened with 60 talents during the last test, a new national record in Korea. The man had earned the nickname Dead Genius, likely because his extraordinary abilities had only been discovered when it was too late to make use of them. Apparently, this same man had also attempted to take the civil service exam. The news had spread that his talents were uncovered through a special late-stage test, even though the talent panels typically closed at age 20. He had already been 30 when his talents were discovered. Jack remembered that 7 years earlier, he too had taken a government-sponsored test in a final attempt to see if he had any hidden talents. During the test walkthrough, candidates could view their total number of talents and identify which were unlocked. Jack had only one, and even that felt more like a curse than a gift. He had stood there, numb, unable to comprehend why his results had been personally delivered by the head of the Player Association's personnel department. The official had simply handed over the results and wished him luck with his civil service exam. While the world admired and celebrated talented players, constantly asking how it felt to be so exceptional, their responses were often humble. They claimed it didn't matter because they were simply serving their country. Jack recalled a young woman in a formal suit explaining that individuals with only one open talent panel had not awakened. That meant they could not become players. They could only register for the civil service exams like everyone else. The difference between the life of a player and that of an ordinary person, Jack had always believed, was like the difference between heaven and hell. For someone like him, the hope of ever becoming a player was a luxury, nothing more than a distant dream. As usual, he had wanted nothing more than to return home and study hard. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling softly on a photograph of a woman with a little girl, a quiet reminder of what he had lost. Back in April 2018, a cataclysm had shaken Seoul to its core. Jack had often tried to recall those events in vivid detail. That evening, he had played a video documentary to refresh his memory. The lesson began by recounting the appearance of the primordial fog in Seoul and the devastating aftermath. 145,000 people dead out of the 150,000 who had been affected. The video showed that the entire region targeted by the disaster had been nearly obliterated. The speaker in the clip admitted he had been unable to even remain standing when he first saw the fog. At one point in the video, the man said something with unwavering conviction. He claimed that effort mattered more than talent. He insisted he was living proof of that belief. As the man continued talking about his determination to keep improving, Jack couldn't help but wonder if his own efforts had truly been insufficient to reach his goal. For a fleeting moment, the thought gripped him. Was trying not enough? Then, abruptly, Jack slapped himself lightly across the face. He told himself there was no point in dwelling on things he could no longer change. What was done was done. If he had possessed any talent, he thought, he would have awakened long ago, received an offer from the guards, and led a life worth living. Instead, he simply resumed writing notes, trying to push the thought away. Still, Jack often found himself blaming everything on his own inadequacy. He remembered the letter he had once opened from his late mother, a letter filled with love, and with hopes that he and his sister would find happiness despite their circumstances. His mother had died from an incurable illness, and his older sister, who had once dreamed of escaping poverty, had ended up working in a semiconductor factory. There, she had developed leukemia. Jack had wanted to succeed, for their sake, but he had no talent, no money, and no connections. He had already failed the civil service exam 3 times. He didn't understand what more he could have done. He had believed he was doing his best, but maybe that belief had been wrong, and yet, with a quiet desperation, he clenched his fist and told himself that maybe tomorrow would change, if he simply tried a little harder. As the clock in his room neared midnight, a strange blue light appeared in the darkness, and by the time it was almost 6 in the morning, Jack struggled to get out of bed. He remembered that a midterm assessment was scheduled for the day and cursed himself. He had gone to bed earlier than usual, but had still managed to oversleep. After a quick shower, he prepared to head to the academy, but then paused, trying to remember the exact time the assessment was supposed to begin. At the bus stop, Jack overheard someone on the phone telling their mother that they were late, but would grab breakfast on the way to school. Jack stood quietly nearby, waiting for his bus, which was due to arrive in 2 minutes. For some reason, the day felt different. He couldn't explain it yet, but something about the morning unsettled him. Glancing around the bus stop, he tried to pinpoint what was bothering him. When the bus finally pulled up and Jack stepped inside, the feeling lingered. He convinced himself it was just his mood, and decided to read through his notes to distract himself. As he walked down the aisle of the bus, he heard snippets of conversation, someone chatting about a newly released video, another speaking with their spouse. Taking a seat, Jack was surprised to hear someone mention that an old music group had regained popularity. He hadn't known. They were probably on TV, which he didn't watch. Pulling out his notebook, he flipped through the pages, searching for the point where he had stopped studying the day before. Then, quietly, he began reciting the material out loud to himself. While Jack quietly reviewed his notes on the bus, he overheard nearby passengers complaining that it was far too cold for April. Despite the chill, none of them seemed eager to pull out warmer clothing. As he continued muttering aloud about how the training had once begun with the appearance of the primordial fog, one of the passengers suddenly pointed something out. A growing commotion broke out at the front of the bus, prompting Jack to look up from his notebook. He immediately noticed that nearly every passenger had turned to face the right-hand windows. Murmurs spread as people began discussing a thick, unnatural fog that had rolled in so heavily it obscured everything outside. What alarmed them most was that there had been no mention of fog in the weather forecast. At that moment, Jack caught a foul, pungent odor that hit his nose like a wall, something that smelled like sewage. Instinctively, he covered his mouth and nose with his hand, trying to suppress the urge to gag. As he registered how strange the entire situation was, how unnatural the smell was, his phone vibrated in his pocket. When he checked the screen, he found an emergency alert from the government. It warned that the dense fog could cause severe traffic accidents. But what chilled Jack to the bone wasn't the content. It was the date stamped on the message, April 27th, 2018. He stared at it in disbelief. His heart pounded. He clenched his teeth and placed a trembling hand over his chest. He understood now. He had somehow returned to the day the cataclysm began, 10 years earlier. And no one around him had any idea of the horror that awaited them. Only he knew what was coming. Only he knew that out of 150,000 people in the area, 145,000 would die. The atmosphere on the bus grew tenser as the light dimmed unnaturally, and darkness fell over the road like night. Some passengers asked the driver nervously whether they would continue driving in these conditions. Jack knew too well what was about to happen. According to records, there was a 97% chance he would die during the upcoming training. But before he could process that fear fully, a strange notification appeared before his eyes, one he had never seen before in reality. A countdown had begun on a translucent screen in front of him. The message was clear. All players, prepare. Training begins shortly. Jack froze. 10 years ago, this had marked the beginning of the descent into chaos. Monsters had emerged from a newly formed dungeon, initiating a massacre so brutal that no one had a chance to resist. The fog had been the first sign. Then came the screams, the blood, and the collapse of order. The catastrophe had lasted nearly a week, and by the time it ended, almost the entire population of the region had been wiped out. But from the ruins, a few survivors awakened as players. Over time, they developed the strength to fight back. Guides began circulating, video records of player battles were analyzed, and virtual simulations of dungeons were created for training. Slowly, the world began to rebuild itself. Jack remembered all of it. He had studied it countless times, run through virtual dungeons over and over. Though he had never awakened as a player himself, he had always believed that in simulations at least, he could be the best. He had memorized battle patterns, enemy types, and event timelines, yet all of that knowledge had only ever been theoretical. Now, for the first time, he was experiencing it firsthand. Suddenly, the bus jolted violently and crashed into something. The passengers screamed as panic surged through them. From the windows, nothing could be seen but the dense fog. Visibility was zero. Schoolchildren cried out, worrying they would be late for school, unaware of the danger closing in around them. Jack, however, knew exactly what came next. He forced himself to stay calm. He had seen it all before, in footage, in documents, in simulations. And now, if the alert was right, he was the only player here, the only one who had received the countdown. That meant the responsibility of survival, maybe even saving others, rested on him alone. Then, without warning, a new notification appeared before his eyes. You are being observed. Bonus rewards available. Jack's eyes widened. Something, or someone, was watching him. And now, the game had truly begun. What happened next took Jack by surprise. In this world, the fate of each individual could hinge on what kind of bonus they received from the mysterious entities known as the guards, beings who existed one level above the players. Without warning, Jack received a message indicating his bonus: eyes of a cold-blooded observer. The moment the notification appeared, Jack felt an eerie calmness settle over him, as if he were no longer acting but watching events unfold from outside his own body. It was a detached, analytical state that somehow steadied his nerves. Then, with 10 seconds left until the so-called training began, the bus driver announced that visibility was too poor due to the fog, and that everyone would have to continue on foot. Just as the passengers prepared to disembark, Jack suddenly shouted for everyone to lie flat on the floor. His voice was urgent and loud. He knew it was their only real chance to survive the first wave. As he gave the warning, another notification popped up. An unknown observer has taken interest in the brunette. A passenger suddenly pointed ahead and asked in a trembling voice what that thing was. The driver turned to look and froze. Inside the bus, a glowing blue vortex had materialized seemingly out of nowhere. Then, as if stepping through a portal, a girl with angelic features and flowing blonde hair emerged. A message followed. Mid-level administrators have arrived. The girl introduced herself in a monotone voice as Senya, a mid-level administrator. Her golden eyes were cold, her expression unreadable. She informed everyone that training was about to begin. Another message was immediately displayed to Jack. He would be placed in a training zone for 7 days. He could not leave it. The difficulty would scale based on how many survivors remained. Passengers began murmuring nervously. They didn't understand what was happening and still clung to the hope that this was just a film shoot or an elaborate prank. Several turned to Senya and protested, saying they weren't in the mood for jokes. But Senya remained impassive, explaining that survival would now depend entirely on their own efforts. Before they could process her words, a loud thud came from the right side of the bus. Everyone turned in alarm. A man had slammed against the window, blood splattered across the glass. Panic began to build inside Jack. He knew what came next. Around him, people began reaching for their phones, trying to call the police, convinced someone had just been murdered. But Jack understood the truth. This was part of the monster's strategy. They sowed fear by scattering corpses, breaking spirits before the real attack even began. Then the goblins arrived. They came in groups, small and savage. One of them leapt onto the side of the bus, his grotesque face pressed against the window, terrifying the passengers. Others climbed onto the roof, the noise of their claws scraping against metal driving the panic higher. People screamed. Some tried to escape, others froze in fear. Inside the bus, chaos erupted. Half the passengers wanted to flee into the unknown fog, while the others hesitated, unsure whether staying was any safer. But Jack knew. Outside was death. He had studied this event endlessly over the past decade. Fighting goblins directly, especially for ordinary civilians, was a death sentence. Back then, these monsters were far stronger than any human. In the future, goblins would be considered low-tier enemies, barely a threat. But here and now, in the early stages of the catastrophe, they were lethal. He realized they didn't have much time. The goblins were already preparing to force their way inside. As the front door of the bus buckled under the assault, passengers began to scream and push toward the rear. Jack tried again. He pleaded with them to stay down and not draw attention to themselves. But it was too late. The fear had consumed them. No one was listening anymore. Jack was already prepared to lie down on the floor, but he made one final attempt to reason with the people around him. He explained in a tense voice that they had very little time and that staying inside the bus was their only hope. But the panic had already taken hold. The passengers were too terrified to understand why they should remain where someone had just been killed outside. It was in that moment Jack realized, with bitter certainty, that no one was going to listen to him. Suddenly, his status and inventory window lit up before his eyes. The unknown observer tracking him seemed to grow even more interested. As Jack quickly scanned his stats, he was shocked. His numbers were far above what he expected. In fact, they were higher than the average stats of the King of Fists during training, who had only scored around 9. But there was no time to dwell on that. The goblins were closing in fast. Just then, one of them shattered the front door with a club. Chaos erupted. A flood of goblins swarmed the bus, weapons raised, twisted smiles stretching across their faces. They launched themselves at the screaming passengers, cutting them down one by one. Their attacks were brutal and merciless. Cries for help were ignored. The goblins seemed to take genuine pleasure in the carnage they left behind, their blood-streaked faces glowing with satisfaction as they surveyed the devastation. One goblin eventually noticed Jack, lying motionless on the floor. With a suspicious scowl, it stepped forward and jabbed him in the ribs with its club. But Jack remained still. He activated the eyes of the cold-blooded observer and silently thanked whatever entity had granted him this bonus. His plan was working. He knew that certain safe zones existed during training sessions, and the bus was one of them. The condition was clear: remain inside and don't move. Any sudden action could violate the requirements and forfeit the zone's protection. Though Jack was terrified the goblin would sense something and lash out, he endured. Slowly, his fingers curled into a small, controlled fist. He believed this ability, this calm under pressure, was due to the bonus he had received. Even though Jack didn't understand why he had been chosen for such a gift, he suspected it would improve his odds of survival. Watching the goblins from just a few meters away, he recalled that the first attack wave would last about 10 minutes. He had already endured the first 5, when the goblins were still searching for the bus. Now, there wasn't much longer to go. But then something went wrong. One of the goblins returned to Jack and, without warning, grabbed him by the head and hoisted him into the air. Jack's breath caught. The goblin leaned in and licked his cheek. A wave of revulsion passed through him, but he forced himself to stay still. Moving even slightly could cost him his life. Then a new notification appeared. The brave Lion King wishes to grant you an opportunity. A glowing vial materialized in Jack's hand, a strength-enhancing elixir sent by the new guardian. The potion would last 10 minutes and temporarily boost his power. Jack's eyes widened. The elixir was equivalent to 3 level-ups. Normally, a player would receive 2 stat points per level, meaning this potion gave him 6. That was enough to shift the balance entirely. He realized something crucial and dangerous. If he drank the elixir, he would have enough power to fight back. He could survive, maybe even win. Another message followed. The brave Lion King expects courage. Jack understood that this meant the Guardian wanted him to stand and fight. But Jack hesitated. The logic didn't make sense. There were only seconds left until the attack ended. If he simply remained still, he would survive without lifting a finger. He gritted his teeth, suspecting that these Guardians didn't care about survival. They wanted a show. Suddenly, yet another notification flashed. The brave Lion King is requesting a deal with the mid-level administrator. And then everything around Jack was swallowed in a blinding blue light. Senya's voice rang out calmly over the chaos. The brave Lion King has requested to alter the environmental conditions of the training zone. Jack clenched his jaw in frustration. So the Guardian had gone behind his back. He realized with fury that the odds were no longer fixed. The game had just been changed against his will. Because he knew that this guardian was forcing a useless sense of bravery on the players, because he loved the cruelty and suffering of others. Jack knew that given the nature of this guard, he would want to remove the safe zone. Then Senya bowed her head slightly and announced that the deal was complete, and the safe zone would be cancelled in 30 seconds. Then the guy suddenly blurted out that if the guard forcibly changes the training zone, then the player should receive compensation, which means there is not enough elixir. Jack was adamant that they couldn't ignore the rules when his life was on the line. Senya was surprised that the boy knew so much, while the unknown observer was surprised, and the brave Lion King remained silent. Jack could not come to terms with such injustice, and at the same time understood the girl's surprise, because they learned about the laws only 7 years later. When the girl wanted to know how the guy knew this, Jack considered it unnecessary to explain, since the players were not obliged to reveal their game. While Senya remained silent, Jack noted that they had already spent 10 seconds talking. Pointing his finger at her, he continued to say that they had wasted 10 seconds in the safe zone and had to make up for it. Eventually, the girl admitted that the player was right and announced that the safe zone would be extended for 10 seconds after their conversation. Also as compensation, Jack was given good quality grease and a rusty iron sword. However, the guy was not very happy with such a small compensation for changing the script. However, in such a situation, he had no choice but to take what was offered. The guy even had to mention the laws for the sake of an extra 10 seconds, but it was not in vain, because at that moment, the goblin attack ended. After a certain amount of time, all the goblins immediately tried to quickly escape from the scene of their crime. Dear YouTube viewer, please leave your comment and subscribe to the channel, because I tried a lot for you. If you don't do this, the goblins will beat me half to death. Save me. Now that the goblins were gone, Jack could finally be glad that the conversation had helped avoid death and fighting. When the boy received a notification that the guard lion was disappointed, the boy cursed under his breath. When Jack got up from his seat, he suddenly felt sick from the picture he saw. The guy immediately covered his mouth with his hand because of the nausea that came from the terrible smell that was in the bus. But Jack tried to push those thoughts aside as quickly as possible and focus on survival. Because the bus broke down, Jack had to make an effort to open the doors and get out of it. He needed to find food, and his main goal was the grocery store, which was 300 meters away. Jack had studied in the area for 3 years, so he remembered the geography very well, and he needed to move quickly to avoid getting into a hopeless situation. Among the survivors were those who found the wounded and tried to call at least someone for help. Jack assumed there must be other survivors nearby, but he had difficulty getting his bearings because of the fog. For some reason, Jack felt calm being among the corpses and assumed it was because he had been given those skills. But suddenly he looked down and saw someone's small hand next to his leg. At that moment, the guy thought that he had accidentally almost stepped on a corpse, but suddenly he heard a child's voice. The little girl, with tears in her eyes, asked for salvation and help. He was surprised. Jack had stepped back slightly, unsure of what to do next. Just then, on the other side of the wrecked bus, he noticed a lone goblin lingering behind, even though the main wave had already passed. The creature was grinning malevolently and was poised to slash a young girl's leg with a sharp, jagged knife. The girl, still pleading with Jack for help, cried out through her tears. She confessed, in a trembling voice, that she simply wanted to see her mother again. Jack snapped back to focus. He realized that, despite the goblin's threats, the girl hadn't yet been injured. Her screams, he now saw, were fueled by fear, not pain. The goblin, oddly enough, didn't immediately strike. It appeared strangely concentrated, almost cautious. This made Jack suspicious. He began to wonder whether the girl possessed a hidden talent, something rare and unawakened, that might be drawing the creature's attention. He had read about such cases before, though he had never seen one himself. At that moment, Signia appeared beside him and remarked that even a goblin of that level would be difficult for a beginner to defeat. Jack considered her words carefully. If she was being sincere, then the girl must be extraordinary. He realized the girl was likely too paralyzed by fear to be aware of her own potential. If he left her now, she would almost certainly be killed by the next group of goblins. Determined, Jack made his decision. He opened his inventory. Unlike most trainees, Jack had extensive knowledge of training scenarios, thanks to his experience with both theoretical strategies and virtual dungeons. He recalled that even lower-level goblins could be deadly, if faced head-on. But if they were unaware of an attack, the odds changed. A goblin couldn't defend against what it couldn't see. If he struck the weak point quickly and decisively, He might be able to win. Just as he executed his move and the goblin fell, Jack received a notification awarding him experience points for the kill. Without pausing, he turned toward the girl. She had stopped crying and was now looking at him with wide-eyed surprise. Jack told her to get up and prepare to move. As he turned to walk away, he warned that if she fell behind, he wouldn't wait for her. The girl, startled, quickly got to her feet and mumbled that she was already following him. They continued on together until they reached a nearby store. Once there, Jack pointed to the front entrance and instructed the girl never to open the door, no matter what happened. When she didn't respond immediately, he turned and asked again if she had understood. The girl nodded quickly, her face pale with anxiety, and gave a quiet affirmation. Jack noted her fear. It was understandable, given the brutality of the training they were now part of. He reinforced his warning. Under no circumstances was she to open the door. Jack stood silently for a moment, watching the girl. She was trembling, clearly overwhelmed. Just then, a new notification flashed before them. A goblin attack was approaching. Both Jack and the girl instinctively looked up. Jack immediately asked if she had seen the message and told her to read what it said. As the girl nervously scanned the notification and mentioned something about safe zones, Jack quickly asked her where the nearest one was. When the girl mentioned the school, the store, and the hospital as safe zones, Jack became certain she was a player. He recalled that before the attack began, only players could perceive safe zones, and typically only the store would appear. The fact that she had seen the school as well suggested that she possessed an unusually strong talent. As soon as the warning about the incoming goblin attack appeared, Jack grew cautious. He turned to the girl and reminded her firmly that under no circumstances was she to open the door. He even suggested that if she didn't feel confident, she could sit facing the wall so she wouldn't be tempted to look outside. Right then, a notification appeared, confirmation that the safe zone had been successfully established. Jack and the girl looked out the window and saw that the thick primordial fog had returned, along with goblins emerging from within it. In the distance, screams echoed through the air. Survivors were still outside, trying to defend themselves by standing back to back, but the effort was futile. The goblins, far stronger than the unprepared newcomers, attacked from all directions. Soon, the survivors spotted the store and realized it had become a safe zone. Panic overtook them, and they sprinted toward the store, pounding on the door and begging to be let in. But when they looked inside, all they saw was a boy holding a sword pointed toward them, staring back with a cold, detached expression. His silence only stoked their desperation and rage. Jack, emotionless on the outside, felt a dull ache within. He had never considered himself particularly sensitive, but witnessing this scene hurt him. Still, he stood his ground. When the goblins reached the crowd, the slaughter began. One man was slashed, and blood splattered across the door and walls. The rest were taken down one by one, their cries turning into silence. Jack watched, his face unmoved, as their blood stained the glass. The survivors' pleas faded away, unanswered. He knew full well that the safe zone could not be forced open from the outside, but if he had so much as cracked the door from within, the zone's protection would have vanished instantly. The girl had covered her ears, trembling, while Jack burned the image of the massacre into his mind. He wanted to remember it, not just for himself, but for the vengeance he intended to take on the system that allowed it and the so-called guards who observed it all like a game. 6 hours passed after the goblin attack. Jack sat beside the girl, who had since calmed down. Without looking directly at him, she shyly thanked him, something she hadn't managed to say earlier. She introduced herself as Sylvia and explained that she was 14 years old. Jack gave a tired sigh. He told her he hadn't saved her without reason, but he also couldn't promise she would survive. His words seemed to catch Sylvia off guard. Fear clouded her expression as she gently touched his arm and asked what she had done wrong. Realizing he'd been too harsh, Jack clarified that it wasn't her, it was the situation. He couldn't guarantee her safety, because he couldn't even guarantee his own. Sylvia listened quietly, unsettled by the revelation. Jack reassured her that he wouldn't cast her out, so long as her presence didn't put them both in danger. Then he suggested she get some sleep. A little later, Sylvia asked where they would go next. Jack didn't respond immediately. He recalled the notice listing the standard and additional safe zones. After a brief pause, he told her their next destination would be the parking lot near the large tower. When he noticed her confused expression, he realized she hadn't seen the additional safe zone there. Neither had he, until now. In truth, Jack had never heard of such a location being designated as a safe zone before. but he was convinced the tower was a key point in the training process. Eventually, Jack refilled his water supply and prepared to leave the store, with Sylvia following close behind. The moment she stepped outside, she covered her mouth with her hand, visibly recoiling from the overpowering stench in the air. Jack watched her carefully and realized she was pretending to be okay, but even for someone his age, the scene before them was horrifying. As Jack surveyed the wrecked cars and the corpses lying among them, he thought grimly that this must be what a destroyed city looked like. Suddenly, he warned Sylvia to watch her step and look carefully at the ground. She didn't understand why at first, so he pointed more directly, asking her to let him know if she saw anything jelly-like on the pavement. A moment later, Sylvia pointed off into the distance and asked if that was what he meant. Jack followed her gaze, then instinctively reached for the hilt of his sword, surprised at how quickly they had encountered a slime. Slimes were known to be the weakest of all monsters, so weak in fact that even a child could deal with them. Jack eliminated the creature effortlessly. As he pulled back, he found himself struck by an odd familiarity. The way he held the sword, the movement, the balance. It all felt natural, despite this being his first real fight outside virtual dungeons. After the brief encounter, Jack explained to Sylvia that slimes were the lowest tier monsters. If more appeared on their route, he would take care of them. Still, he was quietly baffled by how quickly the creature had shown up. Later, as he glanced down at his worn, rusty blade, he couldn't help but think again about how familiar it all felt. Though he'd only trained with swords in simulated environments, the sensation in his grip and the muscle memory hinted at something deeper. He tightened his hold on the hilt, unsettled by how second nature it had become. As they continued on, Jack kept dispatching slimes with ease. He also noticed that Sylvia had a sharp eye. She was spotting monsters even faster than he was. After one of his kills, Jack received a level-up notification. His stats increased. 2 points were added to all attributes, and an additional bonus point was randomly assigned. When Sylvia asked why his body had begun to glow faintly, Jack told her he had just leveled up. She listened with excitement, fascinated by the idea that killing monsters could lead to such visible progress. When she declared that she would try to level up as well, Jack turned toward her with a calm, unreadable expression. He kept fighting, his movements growing faster and more efficient. With each swing, it felt more like instinct than learning. By the time he reached level 3, he paused to think. The pace of his advancement seemed unusually fast, and the random bonus stats were concerning. Then he remembered a note from the famous King of Fists, the only one known to have completed the training. Even he had struggled to earn random stat bonuses. Jack had now received those bonuses twice, by level 3. He remembered the instructor's verdict after his retest. They had confidently told him he had no talent. That memory led Jack to suspect that the talent evaluation panels might have activated when he returned, although he had been certain they were locked. Looking back now, he wondered if his stats simply showed rapid early growth, which faded later. Still, he considered that this might work in his favor. The most important thing was that he was alive. He had leveled up quickly, attracted the attention of the observing guardians, and survived where others hadn't. If his theory proved correct, there was a real chance he could achieve what he had set out to do. 3 years from now, a potion capable of curing his mother's disease was expected to enter the market. It would cost 1,000,000,000 Jack intended to survive the training, keep leveling up, and save every resource he could to afford it. As they made their way toward the tower, Jack and Sylvia continued clearing out slimes. Each battle brought more bonus stats, and eventually, Jack unlocked another crucial feature. After reaching level 5, group formation became available. Without hesitation, Jack sent Sylvia an invitation to form a party. As he glanced at her, he thought that she, too, would become stronger in time. Somewhere beyond their vision, an unknown observer began to take keen interest in the pair. Suddenly, Sylvia turned to Jack, her eyes full of tears, and thanked him sincerely. She promised she would do her best to help and pleaded with him not to abandon her. Jack met her gaze, realizing she was still deeply afraid of being left behind. He felt a pang of sympathy. She was just a child after all, but he had enough burdens of his own to carry. With a quiet exhale, he responded calmly, telling her that promises meant little unless they were backed by actions. If she truly wanted to stay by his side, she would have to prove it. Jack realized that his growth was accelerating unnaturally. He was gaining levels quickly and receiving bonus stat points. But he also understood that deeper inside the tower, a formidable monster awaited, one he wouldn't be able to protect Sylvia from if they weren't prepared. They continued their journey toward the tower. Along the way, they encountered a white fox. Sylvia immediately asked if it was a new kind of monster. Observing the creature, Jack concluded that it resembled a neutral monster, but possessed a passive skill, one that could trigger aggression in other monsters nearby. He decided the safest option was to avoid confrontation altogether. When he explained that they should go around it to avoid provoking others, Sylvia asked what provocation meant. Before Jack could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps caught their attention. In the next moment, a pack of foxes surrounded Sylvia. Without warning, the creatures pounced on her as she tried in vain to shield herself with her hands. Jack quickly turned to her, noting with surprise that she wasn't taking much damage, though one of the foxes was beginning to grow in size. Without hesitation, Jack dashed forward, targeting each creature with precise strikes to the neck, dispatching them one by one. As his body briefly shimmered with a blue glow, signaling a level up, Jack immediately asked Sylvia if she had been hurt. Suddenly, an administrator appeared beside them and asked for Jack's current level. He calmly responded that he was level 8. Sylvia, visibly skeptical, was urged by Jack to scan him if she didn't believe it. Shortly after, system notifications informed Jack that several observers were astonished by his growth rate. He admitted to himself that he, too, found it strange. His stat window had developed in a way he hadn't expected, far more advanced than standard, and while it puzzled him, he recognized it as a rare opportunity. He quickly briefed Sylvia on where they were headed next and told her that he would explain the plan in more detail once they were inside. He warned her that if she didn't follow instructions carefully, they could both die. However, he reassured her that if she simply listened, things would be fine. As they progressed, the pair successfully defeated numerous city foxes. Jack looked at Sylvia, recalling that he had given her a pair of iron gloves. With that, their preparation was nearly complete. All that remained was to follow the strategy. When they reached the dungeon entrance, a confirmation window appeared before Jack, asking if they were sure they wanted to proceed. Once they agreed, they were instantly teleported inside. Startled by the transition, Sylvia instinctively grabbed Jack's hand. Upon arrival, they found themselves facing a small group of goblins and a few foxes. The goblins immediately turned toward them as soon as they entered. Jack looked at Sylvia and asked if she remembered the plan. She responded confidently, assuring him that she hadn't forgotten anything. Jack instructed her to start with the goblins. Without hesitation, Sylvia charged forward. The goblins advanced to meet her, but she remained composed. She struck the lead goblin in the face with her left hand, landing the blow cleanly. Unlike other dungeons they had encountered, this one had aggressive goblins, while the foxes remained neutral unless provoked. Watching Sylvia fight, Jack was struck by her natural instincts. She was performing even better than he had anticipated. Perhaps she really was a prodigy. He knew that the goblins posed no real threat to her at this stage. She had exceeded all his expectations. When she finally defeated the last of them and paused to catch her breath, Jack approached her and suggested she take a short rest. As he stepped away to a quieter corner, he mentally prepared for the next stage. He knew that once all monsters on the first floor were eliminated, a mini-boss would spawn. Leaning against the wall, he asked Sylvia if she'd recovered. Once she gave a nod, he told her to finish off the remaining enemies and to run to him as soon as she was done. Just as he gave the command, she was winding up to strike the nearest fox. Throughout the encounter, Jack closely observed the battlefield, trying to maintain control over the cleanup process. Then, to his surprise, the pause effect suddenly activated, freezing all activity in the area. Jack immediately realized what this meant. An administrator had intervened. As he turned toward the source of a voice, he clenched his teeth. This effect was incredibly rare and costly, and he couldn't understand why it had been used on him. An unknown observer had appeared, one who radiated authority, and asked Jack if he had lost his mind. Confused but calm, Jack responded by asking what she meant. Internally, he was still questioning why such an expensive mechanic had been triggered just for him. The administrator, who introduced herself as Senya, accused Jack of behaving as if he had predicted what was coming. She asked if all of this had been part of his plan. Jack remained silent, puzzled by her interest. Senya, in turn, expressed confusion over his reckless behavior. Jack, taken aback by the way she criticized him, listened quietly as she elaborated. She warned that the level 13 goblin he was about to summon had powerful stats, far beyond his current capabilities. Sylvia stood silently at his side, paralyzed by fear, while Senya explained that, statistically, Jack stood no chance of winning. Jack, however, found her words odd. They sounded more like concern than warning, almost as if she didn't want him to die. That detail made him suspicious. He quickly concluded that Senya's words weren't just protective, they were strategic. She denied caring about him, but Jack recognized the signs of a lie. Clearly, he had become someone who drew too much attention. Senya then claimed Jack was a player who somehow knew the future, a rare figure capable of capturing the interest of the guards, powerful entities overseeing the game. Jack took that as confirmation that his survival mattered to someone. He also noted that in all his knowledge of future events, there had been no mention of her, suggesting her role might have been minor or short-lived. Amused, Jack chuckled. He told her she hadn't even managed to leave a lasting impact as an administrator. When she asked if he was trying to insult her, he replied bluntly that he was simply being honest. She didn't know how to turn a situation in her favor. Then, with a grin, Jack suggested she could make this worthwhile. He proposed that if she truly wanted to entertain the guards, she should tell them, after a pause, that he couldn't defeat the goblin, only for him to miraculously win. That would surprise everyone. He added that the twist of a level 8 player defeating a boss would drive the guards wild, and if it worked, it might even boost her rank. Senya remained skeptical. She couldn't understand how he planned to do it, especially while protecting the girl, but Jack remained confident and insisted that this would be a win-win situation. All he wanted in exchange for the show was a deal. Senya's patience finally snapped. She accused Jack of being arrogant and warned him not to push his luck. But Jack remained unfazed. He reminded her that if she had truly intended to kill him, she would have done it already. Calmly, he emphasized that their agreement could be mutually beneficial. Finally, Senya relented and asked what he had in mind. After they struck the deal, time resumed. Sylvia resumed her fight, and soon afterward, she turned to Jack and reported that she had defeated all remaining monsters. Just then, a goblin soldier appeared, signaling the start of the boss monster zone. Jack and Sylvia quickly retreated to a hidden spot. Jack urged her to stay quiet and keep out of sight. The moment the goblin detected their presence, it raised its massive spear and launched a brutal attack in their direction. Jack remained hidden from the goblin, fully aware that stealth was his best chance at survival. He knew the creature's most dangerous skill was its spear throw, and avoiding it was crucial if he wanted to win. Once the initial attack passed, Jack stood up quickly and signaled for Sylvia to follow him. Turning briefly to Senya, the administrator, Jack reminded her to pay attention. He had promised her a fight worth watching. He wanted her to witness how a low-level player could defeat a powerful boss. The moment Jack stepped into view, the goblin raised its massive spear and pointed it directly at him. Jack tensed. He had to admit to himself that the boss was far more intimidating than any monster he'd faced so far. He also recalled that after executing its initial spear throw, the goblin typically charged at any survivors, and that's exactly what it began to do. Jack watched closely, trying to read the goblin's next move. There were two primary attack patterns, a thrust and a wide swing. The goblin chose the latter, but Jack managed to dodge the swing just in time. As the goblin momentarily exposed itself, Jack counterattacked, but his strike dealt only minimal damage and served mainly to enrage the beast, which he had anticipated. Now furious, the goblin lunged forward with a vicious thrust. The strike was fast, faster than anything Jack had encountered before, but somehow, he managed to parry it again. In that instant, Jack realized something strange. He could predict the goblin's movements, almost as if his body was reacting before his mind caught up. Determined to end the fight, Jack resolved to use everything he had. His sword was already stained with blood as he pressed the attack. Meanwhile, not far from the battle, Sylvia was holding off the lower-level monsters as planned. Though she was under pressure, she stuck to the strategy, absorbing the incoming attacks to keep them from interfering with Jack's duel. From a distance, Senya continued to observe. To her surprise, several unknown observers had appeared, drawn by the unusual fight. One of them asked if it was true that a level 8 player was battling a dungeon boss. Senya confirmed it, though she admitted, even to herself, that she found it hard to believe. She speculated that Jack might be hiding his real level. His movements were precise and sharp, unlike those of ordinary players, but in her view, his attacks still lacked the power needed to finish the fight. She knew that weak strikes only exhausted a player. They didn't win battles. As the goblin prepared to deliver a devastating blow, Jack shouted to Sylvia that it was time to execute the next phase of their plan. That was her cue. Sylvia immediately raised one hand, signaling her readiness. The goblin hesitated. Until then, the girl had remained almost completely still. But now, with a single strike, she took down one of the nearby monsters and gained experience instantly. Senya watched closely. She tried to conceal her shock, but what she was seeing defied expectations. Sylvia's actions didn't just benefit herself, they also gave Jack shared experience, which pushed his level higher. But the trade-off was real. His sword grew dull with every strike. Still, leveling up granted Jack vital stat points and restored his health, a major advantage, especially given the zone's low difficulty and Jack's own rapid growth. Seizing the moment, Jack told Sylvia to continue keeping the monsters at bay and to stay alert. He realized that as long as Sylvia distracted the lesser creatures and the goblin remained focused on him, he could continue increasing his attributes and healing during the battle. With another well-timed dodge, Jack avoided a crushing blow, and for the first time, he truly believed he had a chance to win. Jack hoped to strike the goblin's weak point, its neck. Exhausted, drenched in sweat, and barely withstanding the relentless onslaught, he quickly opened his status window to check his current experience points. Meanwhile, Sylvia was still working hard to raise his level by dispatching nearby monsters. At that moment, Jack took a heavy hit. The goblin's attack landed squarely on his shoulder. It hurt, but the pain was immediately followed by a level-up notification. With renewed strength, Jack gritted his teeth and swung his sword in a clean arc across the goblin's neck. The blow connected, but it wasn't enough. The boss merely turned its head to glare at him. Jack didn't hesitate. While the goblin was distracted, he struck again, this time aiming precisely at the back of its neck. His rusted sword snapped on impact, but it was enough. A system message flashed before him, confirming that the goblin had been defeated. As he stood there trying to catch his breath, the system credited him with experience and recognized his run as a solo clear. Sylvia rushed over, her face filled with relief, and threw her arms around him. Jack returned the hug, but it was a mechanical gesture. His mind was elsewhere. Another notification appeared. One of the hidden figure's conditions had been fulfilled. He frowned. He had never heard of this hidden boss before. Meanwhile, in another area of the tower, other survivors were also battling monsters. Among them, a young man was drawing attention for effortlessly slaying level 8 enemies with a single blow. Onlookers praised his strength and urged him not to downplay his skills. But the man, clearly embarrassed, didn't believe he deserved the compliments. Then, he spotted 2 more survivors who had been separated from the group. He raised his hand and called out to them, hoping to draw them back to safety. Back in his own thoughts, Jack couldn't stop questioning himself. Was he truly talentless? But having just defeated a mini-boss, he realized that couldn't be true. He might have knowledge of certain future events, but that didn't make the challenges of the dungeon any less real. His growing notoriety had now attracted the attention of a figure he recognized, a scaled woman, one of the tower's guards, known for her unwavering sense of justice. Unlike the Lion King, who ruled with dominance and pride, she always prioritized the well-being of players. Jack was stunned that someone like her would take notice of him. He began to wonder if the attention had more to do with Sylvia than himself. To others, it may have looked like he had rescued a vulnerable child. As he glanced at her, a glowing sword materialized in his hand, a reward for slaying the goblin boss. He examined it quickly. It was nearly twice as effective as his old weapon. Sylvia, still catching her breath, asked where they were headed next. Jack replied without hesitation. They were going to hunt wolves. He explained that the wolves were level 7, with their leader at level 9, strong, but manageable now. Watching him, Senya, the administrator, listened with disbelief as Jack claimed to know this from someone else. As they left the area, Jack reflected on how he had originally intended to remain in the safe zone until the King of Fists appeared on the tower's 2nd floor. But now, everything had changed. He had a new goal. He decided he would begin collecting money, because whether his talent had been dormant or forged through hardship, he was now sure he had it. He would seize every opportunity the tower gave him. Not long after, Jack met the King of Fists in person. The man looked at Jack with a glimmer of recognition. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Jack knew that the man known as the King of Fists, Sam, would one day rank among the top 8 players in Korea. But at this early stage, Sam looked far more ordinary. Jack watched as Sam encouraged a group of anxious survivors, and it struck him how many people the man had already helped. The title of Trained hadn't been given to Sam without reason. In an easy, somewhat awkward manner, Sam offered the strangers a chance to join his group, only if they wanted to, of course. He explained that they would all stand a better chance if they worked together. Jack paused to consider the offer, but ultimately declined. His polite refusal came as a surprise to everyone present. Jack explained that he and Sylvia were enough on their own and that he was confident they could handle things together. Sam scratched the back of his head, clearly a bit thrown off, but still wished them the best. Jack returned the sentiment courteously. As the pair walked away, some of the others whispered that Jack was acting arrogantly, probably because he hadn't yet seen Sam's true strength. Jack suddenly stopped and turned back. He pointed to his own left eye and advised Sam that, if they ever found themselves facing an overwhelmingly strong enemy, they should aim for that spot. Sam looked confused by the cryptic advice, but thanked Jack all the same. Once they were a good distance away, Sylvia asked whether Jack thought those people could make it. Jack reassured her that they probably would. Sam seemed strong. Still, deep down, Jack knew trouble awaited them. According to the King of Fists memoirs, Sam and 10 survivors would eventually enter the second-floor dungeon of the tower. They would attempt to clear it, but an enemy would appear that would kill almost everyone. In the end, only Sam would survive, and the experience would remain his greatest regret. Jack hoped things might play out differently now, but he still believed joining them was too risky. His thoughts were interrupted by Sylvia, who pointed off to the side and said she'd spotted monsters. Jack turned and saw a small pack of wolves. Praising her for the sharp eye, he proposed they take the monsters down together. Without hesitation, the two rushed into battle. Sylvia, armed with a bat, landed a solid blow on one of the wolves, stunning it. Jack followed up, using his new sword to dispatch several wolves in quick succession. As he fought, he reminded himself to take advantage of the removed level cap and push his stats higher. With that goal in mind, he pressed forward and cut down another wolf. Sylvia smiled after the fight, saying she was glad she'd followed Jack's advice. It was much easier to use a bat than her fists. Just then, a familiar chime rang out, and Sylvia turned to see Jack bathed in blue light. He had leveled up. A notification flashed before him. "Congratulations, you are the first player to reach level 11. As expected, he had outpaced everyone else. Even more surprising, the system awarded him a new title, Discoverer. Jack was stunned. The bonuses to experience were enormous, and he had never even heard of this title before. He had assumed Trained was the only one available at this stage, but as he considered it, it made sense. No one had ever removed the level cap before. Players hadn't fulfilled the hidden conditions, so the title had remained locked away. Sylvia looked at him with concern and asked if everything was okay. Jack nodded and told her they should keep moving. She listened and followed him without question. Unbeknownst to them, Senya and several guards were observing them closely. Jack chose the next path forward, while Senya kept her distance, but not by much. When Jack finally turned to look at the administrator, he noticed her trembling slightly. She was furious. Just the day before, Signia had asked whether he had received any titles. Jack had been surprised by the question, but hadn't answered her right away. After a pause, Jack quietly admitted that he had received a title. Signia's eyes narrowed as she asked what kind of title it was. When Jack told her that he didn't intend to answer that question, Signia's fury flared beneath the surface, though she tried hard not to show it. Jack knew that a player's title couldn't be seen by the guards unless the player chose to disclose it. Despite that, Signia kept pressing, though Jack had no intention of revealing anything. He understood that her position made it difficult, but he still saw no reason to share information that might endanger him. As Jack and Sylvia continued fighting wolves and leveling up, Sam's group had already reached the tower. Sam gathered the survivors and spoke to them with commanding confidence. He explained that there was a dungeon nearby, one that many had heard of, though none truly knew what dangers lay within. His voice was firm as he told them that the world had changed, and with greater risks came greater rewards. He encouraged them to embrace the unknown. The group listened in surprise when he suggested that they enter the dungeon together. One man quickly volunteered to join, citing how much Sam had already done for him. Another followed, agreeing that sticking together was the best strategy. One by one, everyone expressed their willingness. Sam's speech had ignited a fighting spirit among them. They were ready. Meanwhile, back at the stream, wolves suddenly appeared. Jack and Sylvia, already mid-hunt, responded immediately. Jack struck first, giving the monsters no chance to attack. Sylvia commented that they seemed to be finishing them off much faster now. Jack agreed, pointing out that repetition had made them more efficient. They had been hunting wolves all day. Jack had reached level 12, and they were now killing faster than the wolves could even spawn. Sylvia soon spotted another wolf on the opposite bank. Jack approached it cautiously, suspecting that it might be the last one in the area. He struck with precision, killing the wolf instantly before it could react. Suddenly, a red notification flashed before Jack's eyes. His instincts immediately sharpened. This wasn't just any alert. It said that the conditions for the hidden figure had been fulfilled. Jack's heart sank. He had tried to avoid this outcome, but it was too late. A lycanthrope was about to appear. He turned to Sylvia and shouted for her to run, just as a red and black portal tore open in front of him. Sylvia cried out, asking what was happening, but Jack didn't answer. There was no time. He turned around, and the werewolf had already emerged. The lycanthrope let out a long, bone-chilling howl. Instantly, the effect took hold of both their bodies, making movement sluggish. Within moments, Sylvia collapsed, her body paralyzed. Jack yelled for her to crawl behind the nearby car. Sylvia, confused and afraid, asked how he planned to handle the monster on his own. Jack gritted his teeth as he faced the beast. He had suspected there might be a hidden figure during training, but never had he imagined it would be a werewolf. He studied the creature's movements, gauging its physical capabilities. It was clear that the lycanthrope was even more powerful than the monster from the second floor of the tower. Jack couldn't see its level, but estimated it might be around level 25, far beyond what should exist in the tutorial. While Jack wrestled with the decision of whether to flee or fight, the werewolf began preparing to strike. Jack realized that escaping wasn't an option. If he didn't use everything he had, he would die here. Without hesitation, he drank an elixir, boosting his strength by 6 points. He recalled a strategy used by the legendary adventurer Jackson, and committed to following it. The werewolf lunged at him, jaws wide open. Jack didn't move. He stood perfectly still, waiting for the right moment to act. Sylvia, hidden behind the car, watched the entire confrontation unfold. Her heart pounded with worry, uncertain whether Jack could truly handle the creature on his own. She noticed something troubling. The monster's level wasn't displayed. That alone told her this opponent was unlike anything they had faced before. Jack remained completely still, allowing the werewolf to creep closer. Neither Sylvia nor the observing guards could understand what he was planning. As sweat rolled down his face, Jack realized what that missing level indicator meant. This enemy was too powerful to defeat through ordinary means. He quickly did the math in his head. There was at least a 10-level difference between them, and conventional wisdom said that such a gap was nearly insurmountable. Jack remembered tutorial videos that emphasized how low-level players were advised to run from high-tier threats. If escape wasn't an option, they had only one chance: to use creativity, precision, and desperation. With that in mind, Jack pulled a small bottle of blade lubricant from his inventory, a utility item typically used for maintenance, not combat. Meanwhile, the werewolf had drawn close and prepared to strike. Jack anticipated the creature's leap and narrowly dodged the blow. He knew that once it landed, it would follow up instantly. Timing was everything. As the werewolf spun to attack again, Jack quickly spilled the grease across the ground where the monster's paw would land. Just as planned, the werewolf lost its footing. Seizing the opportunity, Jack channeled the strength he had gained from the elixir and slammed into the creature's stomach, hurling it toward the nearby stream. The tactic, which he had once seen demonstrated in a guide, was risky, but it worked. Jack stood at the edge of the water, panting, as the werewolf splashed and thrashed. To his astonishment, the creature began to shrink. Sylvia, watching from her hiding place, was equally shocked. She asked what was happening, but Jack already understood. Water had a weakening effect on lycanthropes. It returned them to their wolf-like base form, stripping them of their monstrous power. Sylvia then asked if Jack had studied martial arts. Jack, catching his breath, shook his head and replied that he hadn't had the time. He'd been too busy preparing for his entrance exam. Sylvia laughed and told him he fought like an action movie hero. Jack only smiled faintly. If he really knew how to fight, he thought, he wouldn't need to rely on tricks. Descending slowly into the stream, Jack approached the weakened werewolf. Its form was now closer to a human's in size. Raising his sword, he delivered a clean, deliberate strike to its heart. Blood gushed as the creature let out one final breath before collapsing. It was over. Jack had succeeded, more easily than he had expected. Upon defeating the werewolf, he immediately gained a level. But the surprise didn't end there. A system notification informed him that he had received the title Excellent Hunter and had advanced 3 levels at once. The guards who had been observing the entire encounter were stunned. Many even rewarded Jack with coins and admiration. As Jack climbed out of the stream, soaked but triumphant, he noticed Xenia appear almost instantly. Her timing was so precise that Jack suspected she had been waiting nearby the entire time. Without acknowledging his comment, Xenia curtly confirmed his new level, 15. She then informed him that he now had access to the item shop. Jack wasn't sure if that feature was normally available during training, but Xenia assured him that it was part of the system. When a new interface opened before him, Senia explained that the shop allowed players to exchange their coins for unique items. Because Jack was still within the training zone, only 4 items were currently available. That didn't bother him. 4 was enough. While Jack stood considering how to spend the small amount of coins he had earned, Signia silently observed him. After a moment, she broke the silence and said that she had a question. She wanted to know if he had a real name. Jack, puzzled by the question, asked her why he needed to answer that. Hearing his response, Signia quickly looked away, insisting that she wasn't curious. Still, her trembling hands and tense expression betrayed her anger. She then asked whether he would be checking the title he had received. Jack replied calmly that she didn't need to be present for that. It became clear to him that she had been hoping he would open his status window in front of her, assuming that he was too inexperienced to realize the risk. But Jack had decided to maintain an air of mystery and keep his information to himself. Turning to Sylvia, he told her to get ready to leave. She asked where they were going this time. Jack answered coolly that they were heading to the 2nd floor of the tower. Sylvia looked surprised. Earlier, Jack had warned her that dangerous monsters awaited them there. When she reminded him of this, Jack reaffirmed his earlier warning without hesitation. Meanwhile, events were unfolding on the 2nd floor. Many players had already been seriously injured, or worse. Sam, too, was covered in blood, but continued to fight, determined to find a way to defeat the creature in front of him. A massive ogre stood before the group, a monster so powerful that Sam couldn't even begin to imagine how to bring it down. Despite the overwhelming odds, Sam refused to give in. He channeled the last of his energy into a powerful punch aimed at the ogre, but the blow was ineffective. The ogre blocked it with ease and remained completely unharmed. Instead of backing off, the ogre retaliated, striking Sam with devastating force. The impact shattered Sam's arm, and he crumpled to the ground, helpless. Panic crept in as he realized that they were going to die here if he didn't find a way out. In that moment of despair, he suddenly remembered the strange guy he'd met earlier, the one who had told him to aim for the left eye. Back then, the advice had seemed odd, but now, Sam had a feeling that it might have been meant for exactly this situation. Before he could act on it, the ogre launched another attack, aiming for his head. Sam narrowly dodged the blow, relying on his reflexes, but the ogre wasn't caught off guard. Using its other arm, it struck Sam again, sending him flying. Blood poured from his mouth as he hit the ground hard. Defeated and overwhelmed, Sam began to lose hope. He was convinced that this was the end. At that exact moment, a system notification echoed through the chamber. A new player had entered the area. The ogre turned its attention to the newcomers, Jack and Sylvia, who now found themselves in the boss room. A timer appeared, giving them 10 seconds to retreat before the exit sealed. Jack immediately assessed the situation. His eyes scanned the area, taking in the sight of wounded players sprawled across the room. He quickly concluded that Sam had been knocked unconscious. Sylvia clung to him nervously, overwhelmed by the scene before them. Jack, without hesitation, opened his inventory and pulled out several low-grade healing potions. Just then, one of the wounded survivors stirred. Struggling to breathe, the man begged them to run. He warned that once the 10 seconds passed, the exit would close and the ogre would kill them all. Jack didn't respond. His expression remained unreadable. He turned to Sylvia, handed her the potions, and quietly asked her to distribute them among the wounded. This is the end of the part 1. If you liked it and want to see more, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and write a comment of at least 4 words. Thanks for watching. Bye.